Welcome to this week's edition of Off the Podium, and I'm delighted this week to be joined by a dear friend and our Associate Principal Second Violin of the LaGrange Symphony Orchestra, Mr. Jonathan Wright. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're always curious at the beginning of the program to find out how it is you came to choose your instrument, which of course is the violin, or did it in fact somehow choose you? So give us a little bit of insight there.
It was a little bit of both. When I was 5 years old, my mom happened to be taking violin lessons because she'd always wanted to play. In my young wisdom, decided that also looked like fun. So I convinced them to give me a pretty small fractional violin that fit me at the time, and started taking lessons along with her. And I would say probably 6 months to a year after I started that process, she ended up quitting because of neck issues, and I continued and never looked back, really.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you on some sort of smaller violin because you're definitely one of the tallest people I know.
You know, even a full-size violin feels small at times, and I wonder if I should have maybe picked viola, but...
Oh, no. Or perhaps, yes. But nevertheless, I mean, there are some, it's one of the great sort of features, I think, of many violinists who do have like these really, kind of muscular, sizable hands, but navigate the fingerboard, incredibly well.
There are some benefits to having bigger hands. I know, like, Itzhak Perlman has very large fingers, very beefy fingers, and so for him, he has, I think, some extra advantage. Mm-hmm. And I know I do too, and I take advantage of that sometimes where maybe I don't have to go as far up in the fingerboard to hit certain things. I can just kind of stretch around and do what I need to do. But I would say there are some advantages to having larger hands and fingers.
Yeah, for sure. So you actually play in multiple orchestras. The LaGrange Symphony, the Savannah Symphony, but you also have this really interesting thread of non-classical collaborations that you've been involved with, and you've been on some pretty extraordinary tours that have taken you places, which is always great as a musician. And you've worked with a number of either crossover artists or non-classical artists, which I think is a great tribute to your flexibility as a musician and a player. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of your most memorable experiences in that world.
So I would say it started with doing some tours back in the mid-2000s. It was doing some Christmas time shows called the Viennese Christmas, and it did center a lot around classical music, but it threw in obviously some very popular, Christmas pop stuff as well. So that was just US based. And then shortly thereafter, they started doing tours in Asia. And that was fully just movie and Broadway music. So pretty poppy. And so I've been to China 4 times and Japan twice. And they were all just what you would classify as pops music. And they would show, film clips or movie clips behind us while we were playing, and they loved that stuff, and it's great. They ate it up, and they kept wanting us to come back. But in addition to that, there's a good number of shows that come through town that play at the Fox or that play at Chastain or even Cobb Energy, and I've been fortunate enough to make the right connections and have people call me for Evanescence or Trans-Siberian Orchestra or stuff like that, which are Trans-Siberian, of course, is huge crossover, rock and roll, classical, that sort of thing. So it's really hammered home the idea that being a versatile musician is very very much in need and also quite a marketable skill set.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't realize you've been to China 4 times. That's pretty extraordinary. I thought it'd been once.
Yes. No, it was just 4 times. Kind of different experience every single time I went. Some good, some not. But did the very stereotypical touristy things. Been to Tiananmen Square and climbed portions of the Great Wall twice.
Mm.
That's an experience. I don't think there's quite a burn like the day after climbing portions of the Great Wall. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very, very different country, very different culture, but I probably wouldn't trade those experiences for anything.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I think, this has come up on a couple of previous programs, but, one of the great things about being a musician is that it can take you places, geographically to experience other cultures. And there's essentially this common language or common cultural experience, kind of shared between any country now, Eastern or Western. I don't think it really matters. That's sort of an interesting point that obviously, China has no shortage of musicians, for sure, and there would be probably no issue putting together an orchestra to play the wonderful film scores and pop scores that you got to play. And in fact, we've programmed multiple examples of that at LaGrange. So it's interesting to me that there's still obviously a very healthy market and an attractiveness to having a Western orchestra come and present that literature. Do you have any sense of why that might be?
I mean, you got to think as I always got the impression that seeing a Western orchestra play Western music, just that was something that they either had not seen before in person for sure, or it was a very limited experience for them if they had already seen it.
Interesting.
In some very large cities.
Yeah.
But we also went to some cities. We also went to some cities where there was only 3 million people, and we got looks as if we were the first and only white people they'd ever seen.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, it does provide an avenue that in fact reaches beyond simply the musical experience for cultural exchange.
Absolutely.
Which is
absolutely
important. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think there's also an element of authenticity there in the same way that we certainly have, great Chinese orchestras come through as well on various concert tours who are playing, the incredible and really wonderful traditional Chinese music. I mean, so there's an immediate cultural authenticity to that. So yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I'm jealous. China 4 times, Japan twice. That's amazing. So okay, well let's shift topic here a little. Ever since I've known you, you've always been a terrific and sought after teacher as a violinist from kind of the burgeoning community of high school students for certain around the Atlanta area and perhaps further afield. So, I'm curious for your take on, what do you get from that experience as obviously a mature musician who's delivering that instruction? So what do you get from it? And why do you think that's sort of an important contribution?
I mean, if more than anything, the more you say things, the more it also reinforces what you kind of already know, but it also almost forces you to keep practicing what you preach. So I can say, to students, do this way and do that way, but it also helps reinforce that, hey, I need to remember to do that as myself. To be the best musician I can be, I should take my own advice and, follow these guidelines or do things a certain way so that I, fall back on the training or fall back on experiences to make myself the best musician I can be. So for me, it's not only helping students become better players, but it's also reminding me how to be a better player. Yeah,
that's really wonderful, and I mean, which is actually kind of more genuine than some teachers I've heard in my career who say, "Well, you do as I say, not as I do," who are clearly not following the model that you just you just illustrated.
I think one of my teachers said it best. He said, our greatest mission as teachers and educators is to make our students not need us anymore. So while you don't want to see your livelihood disappear or whatever, it's to instill those values that you've been taught over and over and over again. I mean, hopefully one day they can pass those on to their students if they choose to go that route.
Right, and so I think there's a wonderful sense of continuity there, and why in
Mhm.
kind of schools of teaching, there is sort of a tradition that you sort of trace back generations worth of
Mhm.
teachers. So I think that's a very important thing. There's that great saying that the teacher and the student ideally should be located in the same person. So even though as the
Mm.
teacher,
There you go.
you're also learning along the way. So that rings very true to
Yeah.
me, my own philosophy. So outside of playing in all kinds of different orchestras and bringing the joy of music across the world, by the sounds of it, you're also one of the founders of the Atlanta Chamber Music Festival, which is a very prominent organization, has much success, kind of over the past, actually many years. So tell
Hmm.
us a little bit about the history and also the mission of that
Sure.
organization.
So it really came out of a need to see a pre-college chamber music-based summer curriculum or summer camp experience. Um, and it kind of came about sitting over lunch with a couple of friends and colleagues in 2012. Um, so we kind of set this broader mission of establishing a pre-college chamber music experience for young musicians, but um, none of us had really had our own organization before. So there's a lot of growing pains over the years, but we knew what we wanted to do, and we set out to find educators and teachers that would help us get there, and whose studios we could draw upon for students. And we kind of went for it. That first year in 2012, we found a church in Sandy Springs that was willing to host us, and I think we brought in maybe 40 kids that first year. And it was all self-funded. We all put our own money in there, and in the hopes that it would kind of take off, and it did, thank goodness. But I think I'd say that our biggest mission is to be able to provide this experience not only to students who can pay for it, but to students who also may not have the means to attend a meaningful summer camp. So over the years, we've had at least a third of our students on some sort of scholarship or financial aid that's totaled well over $250,000. And now that we're a nonprofit, it's easier to get people to donate, but really you have to show them what their money is going towards, and that's been, luckily, we've been able to show that to them, and the numbers of students we're able to bring in, and the number of students we've been able to put on scholarship and financial aid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. And I think, to me, there's always a niche for a chamber music specific experience. And I think the skills that one has to develop as a musician in that environment are quite a bit different to those that you would engage necessarily in the experience in a much larger ensemble, which tends to be, I mean, most music camps either tend to be come and play in this wonderful, enormous orchestra, or please come and play just the solo violin music of Bach. To actually be able to bridge those worlds and impart those skills, I think is a very important niche, and more power to you for being able to give so much support in terms of financial aid for the students who would definitely benefit from that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been great. I mean, to see the students show up for the first day and leave on the last day, and just see the difference in how they've grown is just was really just great to see on its own.
Absolutely. So to our audience, I would say if you're interested in taking a closer look at that program, just search for the Atlanta Chamber Music Festival, and you'll be able to check out the website there and get a much better idea of the work that Jonathan and his team are doing with that organization. So by coincidence, both you and I diversified our career path in recent years in terms of moving outside of music, but still very much retaining music as a core part of our being. So can you talk a little bit about the field that you're working in now and what that entails?
Sure. So about 2.5 years ago, or a little over 2.5 years ago, I actually started working for a company called Cabbage, which is a financial technology company based in Atlanta. It kind of came out of the blue. I wasn't really thinking about leaving music full time. Well, let me back up. I kind of had been thinking about leaving music full time. I didn't have a timeline set up. So when the opportunity came up, I took it as a sign and decided to kind of go for it. So what I do is work with existing customers, existing Cabbage customers, and work on maintaining their accounts so that they get the best possible service and product from us as possible. Relationship management. And I would say that all the years in music kind of helped me become a better employee for this organization. Communication, being a self-starter, knowing how to manage time, things like that, all come in handy in this job. And I thank my years of musical training and my educator and stuff like that for helping me be that kind of person that can find their way into this sort of other career and be, good at it, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was going to be the next part of my question, which is, how do you see your training and long experience in music as playing out as transferable skill assets to, another medium? So, you've largely answered that part of the question. So your discipline, your time management, networking and your people skills, I think, which some might take for granted, but the ability for a musician to work in a string quartet or within a section or what have you, and in that collaborative environment, and also be incredibly sort of detail oriented, but also kind of have an awareness of sensitivity, empathy with other people would absolutely, I think, translate into this parallel career path that you've been able to carve out for yourself.
It does, and it's sometimes I feel like we as musicians don't give ourselves enough credit for that sort of thing. Like we think, okay, we can show up, we can do this thing really well, and we can get paid for it. But there are so many other attributes and beneficial skills that we develop over the years in this field of music that can absolutely translate into the corporate world. I have a friend who's a pretty big time lawyer, and he said to me, when I look at candidates to get hired at my law firm, if you haven't worked in food service, been in the military, or been a musician, I'm not even going to look at you, because I don't feel like you've had the experiences or have the skills that I'm looking for you to be a successful lawyer.
Right.
But I absolutely think that we have skills as musicians that can translate. And to be quite honest, they're very much sought after in the corporate world.
Yeah.
So
and I would say actually it's not just the corporate world, but it's also in medicine and a plethora of other activities where those skills play out. And I think what's interesting and really laudable about the pathway that you've taken is that most people's experiences they get involved in music in elementary school or middle school, and they carry that through high school and college, and it's kind of an asset that's important to them, but it's on the pathway to a career in law or business or what have you, and it's sort of pushed into their career path that way. Whereas you come sort of like fully loaded, years of experience, kind of in music, where those particular skills have been honed to a pretty extraordinary level above and beyond the pathway I just described, and you've then kind of channeled those into this parallel pathway, kind of without having to surrender either your love for music, your engagement in music, or your involvement in music at many different levels. So it seems to me that you've been able to kind of carve out the best of both worlds there, which is a pretty unique approach.
It's definitely rewarding, but it's also very much time consuming. But yeah, I think it's worth it, and I think when I stop having a blast, I'll stop doing all of it, but I don't see that coming anytime soon.
No, and I think that's one of the great joys about music is that you can carry it through your entire life.
Absolutely.
You either as a player or you as somebody who appreciates music or is involved somehow in an organization such as the Atlanta Chamber Music Festival. Yeah, I mean, so many different pathways there, and just very important.
True.
Well, Jonathan, it's been a pleasure catching up, and
same.
to see you as always. And we will very much look forward to the time where you and I can be back on the stage together, which is not too distant. So, ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to my guest, Mr. Jonathan Wright, our Associate Principal Second Violin of the LaGrange Symphony Orchestra. Thanks so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And don't forget to join us for our radio show, The Joy of the Orchestra, every Tuesday on Eagle 102.3 FM. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.